Hi, my name is Ethan Monroe, and on my 24th birthday, my parents didn't celebrate me. Instead, they threw a lavish party for my sister's new job. I walked into my family's grand estate expecting, at the very least, a cake. A quiet dinner. A moment that acknowledged me. Instead, I was greeted with banners, champagne glasses clinking, and a massive cake that read, "Congratulations, Sophia." No one even mentioned my birthday. But the party wasn't the worst part. It was the deception. The years of being overlooked, of being told I wasn't enough. The realization that my own parents had drained my inheritance, the money my grandfather left for me, to fund her career. I should have seen it coming. The condescending looks, the dismissive comments about my dreams as a writer, the way my father would say, "You should be more like Sophia." But that night, on the eve of my birthday, everything became painfully clear. I was never the priority. I was never even a consideration. But why? Why did they take from me to give to her? And what else have they been hiding? I thought I knew my family. I was wrong. The air inside the Monroe estate carried the scent of expensive wine and freshly polished mahogany, but beneath the luxury, it felt stifling. My mother's perfume clung too strongly to the fabric of my shirt as she greeted me with a delicate kiss on the cheek. My father gave a curt nod from across the room, his fingers tapping idly against his glass. Sophia, my perfect older sister, stood near the grand fireplace, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, dear, you made it," my mother said, smoothing an invisible crease in my jacket. I had driven nearly an hour to be here, my stomach twisting the entire ride. I wanted to believe that tonight was about me, that they had remembered. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, forcing a smile. The dining table stretched out in front of us, set with silverware so polished it reflected the chandelier's golden glow. A small part of me had expected at least a birthday cake waiting at the center. Instead, there was an unopened bottle of champagne and a neatly stacked pile of congratulatory cards, none of which were addressed to me. Sophia caught my gaze and smirked. "I got the job," she announced, breaking the silence. My father lifted his glass immediately, his expression warming in a way it never did for me. "To Sophia's success," he said, his voice full of approval. My mother beamed, placing a hand on my sister's arm as if she were the prize of the evening. "Top financial firm," she added, glancing at me, her voice laced with something close to pity. "We always knew she'd do great things." I let out a short breath and pulled out my chair. My name had yet to be spoken. I sat stiffly, my mind racing. This wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They had simply chosen to celebrate something else. I cleared my throat, trying to suppress the bitterness rising inside me. "I got an email today," I said, keeping my voice even. "A publishing house is interested in my manuscript." For a brief second, I allowed myself to believe they would care. That maybe, just maybe, my father would finally look at me the way he looked at my sister. Silence. Then my mother gave a small smile, reaching for the wine bottle. "That's nice, dear," she said dismissively. "But have you considered a real career?" I tightened my grip on my napkin. Richard Monroe, my father, let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Writing doesn't pay the bills, son," he said. "You should be more like Sophia." Sophia, who had spent her entire life excelling at everything, leaned forward slightly, amusement flickering in her gaze. "I hate to say it, Ethan, but Dad's right," she said. "You can't just keep chasing dreams forever." I forced a small laugh, though my chest felt heavy. "Right," I said. "Dreams. What a ridiculous thing to have." The words tasted bitter. My father took a sip of his wine, completely unmoved. "Speaking of practical matters," I said, my voice steady, "I wanted to ask about my trust fund." For the first time that evening, the air shifted. My mother's smile faltered, and my father placed his glass down with measured precision. I knew they had hoped I wouldn't ask. The fund had been set up by my grandfather before he passed. It was supposed to be available to me on my 24th birthday, which was today. Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes cold. It was used for family investments, he said simply. I blinked. Excuse me? My mother sighed, placing her napkin neatly on the table. You weren't going to do anything responsible with it, Ethan, she said. Your father made the right decision. My stomach tightened. That money wasn't yours to take. Sophia rolled her eyes, reaching for her wine. You're overreacting, she said. Dad made a smart move. The investments benefited all of us. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Really? Because I don't see any of those benefits coming my way. Richard exhaled through his nose, his patience wearing thin. You have a roof over your head, he said. You should be grateful. Something in me snapped. I pushed my chair back, standing abruptly. I see, I said, my voice eerily calm. So that's how it is. Sit down, my father ordered, his tone sharp. I didn't. I had spent my entire life being compared to Sophia, made to feel like less. Tonight was supposed to be mine. But instead, I had been reduced to nothing more than a footnote in their evening. I came here thinking we'd have dinner as a family, I said, but clearly I was mistaken. Ethan, don't be dramatic, my mother said. I let out a breath, nodding slowly. Right, dramatic. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding. Behind me, my father's voice rang out one last time. You're acting childish, Ethan. This family has always given you everything. I stopped but didn't turn around. No, I said, my voice steady. You've only ever given me reasons to leave. And with that, I stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from Marilyn, my grandmother. Meet me first thing in the morning. There are things you need to know. I stared at the words, my heart still racing. Whatever it was, I had a feeling it would change everything. The air smelled of expensive wine and freshly arranged flowers. But there was something else beneath it. A sickening weight pressed against my chest as I stepped inside the Monroe estate, my fingers tightening around the small gift bag I had brought for myself. The foyer was decorated with shimmering gold and white banners. Clusters of balloons lined the grand staircase. My eyes landed on the massive cake at the center of the dining hall, its elegant script glowing under the chandelier. Congratulations, Sophia! I stood frozen. My birthday. My 24th birthday. I had expected something small. A quiet dinner, maybe a cake. Just a fleeting acknowledgement that this day belonged to me. Instead, the house was filled with guests in tailored suits and designer dresses. Men clinked glasses of champagne. Women exchanged pleasantries over delicate hors d'oeuvres. Laughter echoed through the hall, but none of it was for me. My mother appeared beside me, beaming. Oh, honey, you're here, she said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. Isn't this wonderful? I turned to face her, my throat tightening. I assume this is for me? I said, keeping my voice even. She blinked, her expression shifting only slightly before she let out a light laugh. Birthdays come every year, dear, she said, smoothing her dress. But your sister just landed the opportunity of a lifetime. I felt my stomach drop. Richard Monroe, my father, raised his glass high above the crowd. His voice rang out, full of authority. To Sophia, he declared, the real pride of the Monroe family. The room erupted into applause. My grip on the gift bag tightened until the paper crumpled in my palm. I had spent years convincing myself that their favoritism was subtle, that maybe I was imagining things. But tonight, there was no mistaking it. I wasn't a thought. I wasn't even a consideration. Sophia finally noticed me, her lips curling into a slow, knowing smirk. She stepped forward, draped in a deep red gown that only added to the spectacle of her success. Oh, Ethan, she said, tilting her head. You actually came. I thought you'd be too busy playing starving artist. The words were laced with mockery, her eyes glinting with amusement. I swallowed the sharp retort burning in my throat and forced a thin smile. You know, I had plans, I said, voice clipped. But I figured I'd come see what the Monroes are celebrating tonight. Apparently, not me. Sophia let out a dramatic sigh, placing a hand on my arm as if she were trying to console a lost child. Ethan, don't be ridiculous, she said. You're part of the family. Of course, you're welcome. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Right, I said. Welcome, like a guest at someone else's event. My father finally turned to acknowledge me. His gaze, sharp as ever, scanned me like I was an afterthought. You should be happy for your sister, he said. She worked for this. You could learn a thing or two about ambition. My chest burned, but I held my ground. Right, I said. Ambition. Is that what you call draining my trust fund? The conversation around us hushed. Eyes turned toward me, the clinking of glasses pausing mid-toast. My father's expression darkened. Catherine Monroe, my mother, cleared her throat, stepping between us. This isn't the time, she said smoothly, her voice dripping with warning. No, I think it is, I said. Because I'm curious, Dad. Was my trust fund used to finance this party? Or was it already spent on Sophia's future? Sophia rolled her eyes, swirling her wine. God, Ethan, she muttered. Do you always have to make everything about you? I turned toward her, my pulse hammering in my ears. It is about me, I said, voice steady. At least it should be. But instead of celebrating my birthday, I walk into this circus. Richard took a slow sip of his drink, setting the glass down with deliberate ease. This family has always given you everything, he said. Perhaps it's time you learn to appreciate that. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Everything? I repeated. Like being overlooked? Dismissed? Compared to Sophia at every turn? Sophia exhaled dramatically, setting her glass down. Honestly, Ethan, she said, you're acting pathetic. It's no wonder you never amounted to anything. The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I took a slow breath, then stepped back, shaking my head. I see, I said. This is who you are, who you've always been. No one stopped me as I turned toward the door. The cold night air hit me like a wave as I stepped outside. I could still hear the laughter from inside, the clinking of glasses, the celebration continuing without me. My fingers dug into my palms as I walked toward my car. As I reached for the door handle, I heard Sophia's voice behind me, sharp and taunting. You'll never be more than a failure, Ethan. I stopped. For a moment, I almost turned back, almost let the anger consume me. But then I exhaled and got into my car. I didn't belong there. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. A message from Marilyn. Meet me first thing in the morning. There are things you need to know. I stared at the screen, gripping the wheel. Whatever it was, it had to be important. The Bayou Bean was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few late-night regulars hunched over their steaming cups. The scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air, blending with the faint hum of a jazz tune playing in the background. I took a seat by the window, my fingers tapping absently against the worn wooden table. My mind was still reeling from earlier, the cheers, the toasts, the way my name had barely been uttered all evening. And then, Sophia's parting words, cutting through me like a blade. You'll never be more than a failure, Ethan. I let out a slow breath, pushing the memory aside. Right now, there was something more pressing. Marilyn Monroe, my grandmother, had asked me to meet her here, and she never called unless it was important. I spotted her the moment she walked in. Even in her 70s, she carried herself with quiet authority, dressed in a dark blue coat that contrasted against her silver hair. She made her way to the table with measured steps before settling into the chair across from me. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice calm but firm. I studied her for a moment. She had always been the only member of the family who didn't treat me like an afterthought. But she also never interfered in family matters, choosing instead to observe from a distance. Of course, I said. You sounded urgent. She nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic of her coffee cup. "There's something you need to know about your trust fund," she said. My stomach tightened. "So it wasn't just used for something better?" I asked, bitterness creeping into my voice. Her expression darkened. "No, Ethan," she said. "It wasn't." I leaned in, my pulse quickening. "My father did something, didn't he?" A slow nod. "He didn't just reallocate it," she said. "He transferred it into an offshore account." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "An offshore account," I repeated, barely able to process it. But before I could speak again, she added something that made my entire body go rigid. "And he didn't do it alone." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She exhaled, setting her cup down with a quiet clink. "Ethan," she said carefully, "it wasn't just your father. Your mother orchestrated the entire scheme." The words landed like a blow. I shook my head, gripping the edge of the table. "No," I said. "She wouldn't." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Catherine Monroe had always played the role of the elegant, devoted wife. The one who smoothed things over when my father was too harsh, who reassured us that everything was fine. But beneath that perfect facade, there had always been something calculating. She wasn't just complicit, she was the mastermind. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course," I muttered. "Why am I even surprised?" Marilyn reached into her bag, pulling out an old, slightly worn envelope. "Your grandfather knew Richard couldn't be trusted," she said, sliding it across the table. "That's why he left a backup plan, for you." I hesitated before taking it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Inside was a single key. I looked up at her, confused. "It belongs to a safety deposit box in Houston," she said. "The answers you're looking for are inside." The cafe suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I clenched the envelope in my hand, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Whatever was inside that box, it was only the beginning. The First Texas Bank loomed ahead, its glass doors reflecting the bright morning sun. I tightened my grip on the key Marilyn had given me, my pulse steady but insistent. A part of me wanted to believe that whatever was inside this box wouldn't change anything, that I was only here to confirm what I already knew. But deep down, I understood. Once I stepped through those doors, there was no turning back. I took a breath and entered. The bank was quiet, save for the muffled sounds of keyboards clicking and low murmurs between tellers and customers. A woman in a crisp blazer greeted me at the front desk, offering a polite but rehearsed smile. "How can I assist you today?" I slid the key across the counter, my other hand fishing my ID from my wallet. "I have a safety deposit box to access," I said, keeping my tone even. She examined the key, nodded, then gestured toward a small hallway. "Right this way, Mr. Monroe." She led me past a row of private viewing rooms before stopping at a heavy steel door. A security guard entered a code, unlocking it with a quiet beep. The woman stepped inside and pointed toward a row of identical boxes built into the wall. "Box 319, she said, motioning for me to follow. I watched as she inserted the key, turning it with a metallic click before sliding the box from its compartment. "I'll give you some privacy," she said, stepping out and closing the door behind her. Silence settled around me. I stared at the box for a long moment before finally reaching for it. My hands were steady as I lifted the lid, but the second I saw what was inside, my breath caught. Stacks of old documents, a thick ledger, several legal papers, yellowed with time. I pulled out the ledger first, flipping it open to the first page. My grandfather's handwriting greeted me, neat, precise, methodical. The first few entries seemed ordinary, listing routine transactions. But as I turned the pages, something shifted. The numbers grew larger. The destinations became vague. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into private accounts, many under names I didn't recognize. I scanned further, my stomach twisting as I landed on a familiar one. Sophia Monroe. My sister's name was listed beside a series of transfers. large sums moving from what should have been my trust fund into separate holdings. My fingers tightened around the pages as I flipped further. This wasn't just about her. It was bigger. Then I saw it. A birth certificate. I stared at the name printed on the paper, my blood running cold. Liam Prescott. I blinked, my mind scrambling for something, anything to explain this. I had never heard that name before. Why was it here? Why was it in a box meant for me? I reached for another document beneath it. A legal contract signed years ago. My eyes scanned the text. My heart beat loud in my ears. Richard Monroe, my father, was listed as a benefactor. The document outlined financial support, educational expenses, healthcare provisions. My breath came sharp and uneven. Liam Prescott wasn't just some random name. He was Richard Monroe's son. My father had been supporting another child in secret for years, and he had used my trust fund to do it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I closed the file, gripping the edges tightly as I tried to steady myself. My entire life, I had played second to Sophia, believing she was the only one they had chosen over me. But I had never even been second. I had been third. I forced myself to take a slow breath, then reached into the box again, searching for anything else that could explain this. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting another call from Marilyn. But it wasn't her. It was a number I didn't recognize. One simple message stared back at me. "You should have left it alone." A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I turned my head slightly, my gaze shifting toward the security cameras in the corner of the room. My reflection stared back at me in the polished steel walls. Someone was watching. I shut the box and stood, sliding the documents into my bag before exiting the room. The hallway suddenly felt longer, the air heavier. As I stepped into the main lobby, my pulse quickened. I wasn't just uncovering financial fraud anymore. I had stepped into something much more dangerous. The cold wind cut through my jacket as I stepped out of the bank. My hands tightened around the folder, the weight of what I had just uncovered pressing down on me like a lead block. Liam Prescott. A name I had never heard before today, yet somehow he had been receiving financial support from my father. Money that had been meant for me. I forced my legs to move, barely aware of my surroundings as I reached my car. My thoughts raced, colliding with one another in an endless loop. Did Sophia know? Had she been part of this? Only one way to find out. The drive to Sophia's law firm felt shorter than usual, though that could have been the adrenaline fueling me. I didn't bother parking properly. My tires screeched against the pavement as I pulled into the first open space, yanking my keys out of the ignition. I slammed the door shut behind me and strode into the building, pushing past the receptionist's attempt to stop me. "Mr. Monroe, you can't just—" "Watch me," I snapped, ignoring the protests as I stormed toward my sister's office. I threw the door open without knocking. Sophia barely looked up from her desk, only arching a perfectly shaped eyebrow as she finished signing something. "No offense, Ethan, but you look like hell," she said, setting her pen down. I tossed the birth certificate onto her desk. The paper slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop inches from her fingers. "Who the hell is Liam Prescott?" I demanded. For the first time that night, Sophia hesitated. She reached for the document, her eyes scanning it carefully. A frown tugged at the corners of her lips. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice level. "So you did know," I accused, ignoring her question. She sighed, rubbing her temples before leaning back in her chair. "I suspected," she admitted, "but I didn't have proof." I clenched my fists, barely holding back the frustration bubbling inside me. "That's not good enough," I said. "You knew Dad was hiding something, and you didn't say a word?" Her jaw tightened. "Because knowing something and being able to prove it are two different things, Ethan." I shook my head, pacing the room. "You're telling me you saw discrepancies in Dad's finances and just let it slide?" "I did my own digging," she said. "Years ago, I found transactions that didn't add up, accounts that shouldn't have existed. But every time I got close, things conveniently disappeared." I stopped pacing, staring at her. "You think he covered his tracks?" She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said carefully, "our father isn't just corrupt, he's dangerous." A chill ran through me. "You're saying if he finds out I'm looking into this, he won't just cut you off," she said, voice low. "He'll destroy you." I let out a breath, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. "You should have told me," I said. "Years ago." Sophia sighed again, standing up. She crossed the room, stopping inches away from me. "You really think I had a choice?" she asked. "You think if I had come to you with nothing but suspicions, Dad wouldn't have found out?" I stayed silent. "You have no idea what he's capable of," she added. I took a step back, shaking my head. "I don't care what he's capable of," I said. "I'm not letting this go." Sophia studied me for a long moment before finally nodding. "Then you better be careful," she said, "because if you're not—" I didn't let her finish. I turned and walked out. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning at the unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Who is this?" I asked. A deep voice, unfamiliar and calm, responded. "Walk away, Ethan," the man said, "or you'll regret it." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, gripping the phone tightly. I was officially being threatened. The neon sign flickered above the entrance of the Ironwood, casting a dim glow over the cracked pavement. The bar sat on the outskirts of Houston, wedged between a rundown motel and a pawnshop that advertised "No I'd, no problem" in bold, peeling letters. It wasn't the kind of place I imagined someone like Liam Prescott would frequent, but according to Maddie's research, he came here often. I hesitated at the door, my fingers tightening around my phone. The unknown caller's warning from earlier still rang in my head, but if they thought a vague threat would scare me off, they didn't know me at all. I pushed the door open. The inside was exactly what I expected. Low lighting, the smell of stale beer and old wood, a jukebox in the corner humming an old country song. A handful of patrons lingered at the bar, nursing their drinks in silence. I scanned the room, looking for the man whose name had turned my life upside down. Then I saw him. Liam Prescott sat in a booth near the back, dressed in a sharp navy suit that felt out of place in a dive like this. He exuded confidence, his posture relaxed, one hand resting on a glass of whiskey, while the other tapped lazily against the table. He knew I was here. His gaze met mine before I even made it halfway across the room, a smirk curling at the edges of his lips. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "You know who I am," I said. He leaned back, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Ethan Monroe," he said, as if tasting the name. "The disposable son." I clenched my jaw, ignoring the jab. "My father funneled my trust fund into your account," I said, my voice steady. "Why?" Liam swirled his whiskey before taking a slow sip. "Because I gave him no choice," he said. I narrowed my eyes. "What does that mean?" He exhaled, setting his glass down. "Let me guess," he said. "You thought your dad was just some rich asshole who played favorites, right?" I didn't answer. Liam chuckled. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." I leaned forward, my patience thinning. "Cut the theatrics," I said. "Tell me why my father's been paying you off for years." His smirk faded slightly. "Because I exist," he said simply. My fingers curled into my palm. "That's not an answer." He studied me for a moment before reaching into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a thin silver money clip and set it on the table. The initials R.M. were engraved into the metal. "He gave this to me when I turned 18, Liam said. "Told me to take the money and keep my mouth shut. Said he had a real family to protect." The words hit harder than I expected. Liam wasn't just some forgotten mistake. He was a secret my father had been paying to keep buried. I swallowed the anger bubbling in my chest. "So why now?" I asked. "Why stop the payments?" Liam's expression darkened. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," he said. "The last transfer was months ago. Then nothing. No warning, no explanation. A cold realization settled in my gut. You think he's preparing to disappear? I said. Liam's silence was all the confirmation I needed. He tossed back the rest of his whiskey before setting the empty glass down with a quiet clink. So, little brother, he said, smirking again, what are we going to do about it? I didn't flinch at the word brother, because whether I liked it or not, I needed answers. And for the first time in my life, I might need to work with the last person I expected. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. A jukebox hummed softly in the background, playing a tune that no one was really listening to. Outside, rain drizzled against the window, streaking the glass with thin lines of water. I sat across from Liam in a booth tucked away in the corner. It wasn't my choice of location. He'd insisted on somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would pay attention to two men talking about taking down their father. He stirred his coffee lazily, his smirk never quite leaving his face. You hate our father, he said. I hate our father. Seems like we already have something in common. I crossed my arms, my back pressing against the cracked leather of the seat. That doesn't mean I trust you. His smirk widened. You don't have to, he said, leaning forward. But if we want to take him down, we need to move fast. I studied him. He was too comfortable, too sure of himself. It was unsettling. Why are you so eager to help? I asked. He took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. Because I'm running out of time, he said simply. I frowned. What does that mean? Liam reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table, tapping it with 2 fingers. I unfolded it, scanning the numbers and account names scribbled in neat, deliberate handwriting. What am I looking at? I asked. Offshore accounts, he said. All tied to Richard Monroe? I glanced up at him. You've been tracking his finances? He shrugged. For years, and one of those accounts was emptied last week. I looked back down at the paper, my pulse quickening. He's moving money, I muttered. Liam nodded grimly. That means he's getting ready to vanish. I let out a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table. So what now? I asked. Liam leaned back, watching me carefully. That depends on you, little brother. I ignored the way the words sat uneasily in my chest. You want my help? Fine, I said. But I'm not doing this blind. If we do this, we do it my way. His smirk returned. Fair enough, he said. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, frowning at the message from Maddie. Your dad is meeting someone tonight at the Monroe estate. You need to see this. I felt Liam's gaze on me. What is it? He asked. I turned the screen toward him. For the first time, his expression darkened. We exchanged a look. We knew what we had to do. The Monroe estate loomed ahead, its towering facade bathed in the dim glow of the outdoor lamps. I had spent my childhood in that house, but tonight it felt foreign, like an enemy's stronghold instead of home. Liam and I crouched behind the neatly trimmed hedges, hidden in the thick shadows that stretched across the lawn. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. My pulse pounded against my ribs as I peered toward the study window, where a sliver of warm light bled through the curtains. Inside, my father was waiting. Liam nudged my shoulder. We have 5 minutes before security makes their next round, he murmured. I gave a tight nod, then crept forward, keeping low as I approached the window. Liam followed closely behind. We pressed against the cool brick wall, angling ourselves just enough to see inside. Richard Monroe sat behind his massive oak desk, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. His expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, as if nothing in the world could shake him. But there was tension in his shoulders, a stiffness in the way he held himself. Across from him sat a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, his posture sharp and precise. A thick folder rested on the desk between them. The man slid it forward. The documents are finalized, he said, his voice smooth but firm. Once you sign, You'll be off the radar within 72 hours. My breath caught. I turned to Liam, who was already staring at me, his jaw clenched. He really is planning to run, I whispered. Yeah, Liam muttered. And he's not planning to take anyone with him. Inside, my father exhaled, rubbing his temples before reaching for the folder. Make sure there's no trace of me left, he said. The man nodded. Everything has been arranged. Liam's grip on the windowsill tightened. His entire body radiated tension, like a coil wound too tight. Then Richard spoke again. And what about my sons? The man didn't hesitate. They won't be a problem. My stomach lurched. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my breathing even, but everything inside me screamed to burst through that window and demand answers. Liam wasn't so composed. That bastard was planning to erase us, he hissed, his voice a low growl. He started to move, but I grabbed his arm, shaking my head sharply. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone, angling it just right to capture the conversation through the crack in the window. Liam glanced at me, his eyes burning with fury, but after a tense moment, he nodded. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was war. Liam's apartment was a sharp contrast to the chaos brewing in my mind. The place was modern, sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Houston skyline. It was the kind of place you'd expect from someone who'd been siphoning money from the same man we were trying to take down. I paced the living room, phone in hand, replaying the video for what felt like the 100th time. The words echoed in my head. Make sure there's no trace of me left. And what about my sons? They won't be a problem. Each time I heard them, my blood ran hotter. Liam sat on the couch, swirling a glass of whiskey in one hand, as he watched the footage again on his laptop. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. The bastard was going to disappear and leave us in the dust, he muttered. I stopped pacing, rubbing a hand over my face. We need to expose this, I said, unlocking my phone and scrolling through my contacts. If we leak it to the press— No, Liam cut in, his voice sharp. The media will turn this into a circus. You think they're going to care about justice? No, they'll paint him as some poor billionaire forced into exile. We need something bigger. I sighed, dropping onto the armrest of the couch. Then what? We just sit on this? Liam shook his head, setting his glass down. I have someone. I looked at him. A contact, he clarified. An attorney who's been trying to nail Richard for years. That caught my attention. And you didn't mention this earlier because— Liam leaned back, resting an arm over the back of the couch. Because I wasn't sure you were serious about taking him down. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around my phone. I'm serious, I said. Liam studied me for a moment, then nodded. She's been building a case on financial fraud, offshore accounts, shell companies, he continued. But this? This is proof of intent. If we get this to her, she'll know what to do. I hesitated. Giving this to a lawyer meant making it official. No turning back. No undoing what came next. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Sophia. The message was short. I know what you're doing. We need to talk. Now Liam peered at my phone and smirked. Looks like Big Sis finally picked a side. I exhaled slowly, staring at the message. This changed things. Now I had to decide. Trust Sophia or go forward with the evidence on our own. I stepped into the towering glass building, my pulse pounding in my ears. The pristine lobby of Winslow and Carter LLP was a stark contrast to the mess unraveling inside my family. The receptionist barely looked up as I strode past, my destination already set. Sophia was waiting for me in a private conference room on the 23rd floor. The space was sleek and modern, with a long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the Houston skyline. She stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're late," she said without turning around. I closed the door behind me. "Traffic," I muttered, though we both knew it wasn't the truth. I had hesitated outside for longer than I cared to admit. Sophia finally faced me, her sharp brown eyes scanning me like a puzzle she was trying to solve. "So," she said, folding her arms tighter, "you're really going through with this?" I didn't hesitate. "He's a criminal, Sophia. You know that." She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You think this is that simple?" she asked. "You think we can just flip a switch and watch him fall without consequences?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "He stole from me," I said, voice steady. "From you. From God knows how many people. He was ready to disappear and leave us all behind. If you're okay with that, fine, but I'm not." Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You still don't get it," she said. "If we take him down, we all go down with him." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She walked to the table and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it toward me. "Look inside," she said. I hesitated before flipping it open. Page after page of financial records, contracts, bank transfers. My name. Her name. Even our mother's. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my throat dry. "Collateral damage," Sophia said. "Dad didn't just funnel your trust fund into his secret accounts. He used family investments, our investments, to fund illegal dealings. Offshore accounts, shell companies, insider trading. It's all here." I stared at the documents, my stomach tightening. "If this gets out," she continued, her voice softer now, "the Monroe name is finished. The entire family will be ruined." I looked up at her, anger and confusion twisting inside me. "You knew," I said slowly. Sophia met my gaze without flinching. "I suspected." I clenched my fists. "And you did nothing?" "What was I supposed to do?" she snapped. "Blow the whistle and take us all down? Lose everything?" I let out a breath, trying to steady myself. "You don't care about justice," I said. "You care about protecting your place in all of this." Sophia's jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong. I'm trying to protect what's left." She slid the folder back toward me. "I can help you," she said. "But if we do this, we have to do it my way." I didn't move. Trusting Sophia meant playing by her rules, controlling the damage instead of exposing everything. But if I went forward without her, there was no telling what kind of fallout would come next. The choice was mine. The folder sat heavy in my lap, its contents spilling out across the table like a confession waiting to be read. I stared at the legal documents, the bank statements, the chain of confidential emails, each one another nail in Richard Monroe's coffin. Across from me, Sophia sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Outside the massive windows of her high-rise office, the Houston skyline stretched endlessly, the city moving forward as if my entire world wasn't crumbling at my feet. "This is everything," she said, her voice steady. "Proof of offshore accounts, money laundering, fraud, more than enough to put him away." I forced my fingers to unclench from the paper I was gripping. "And yet," I said, looking up at her, "you don't want to expose him." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "We can't just expose him," she corrected. "We need to control the fallout." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Control the fallout? Are you hearing yourself? He's been stealing for years. He was planning to erase us." "And if we don't do this right," she said, voice calmer but firm, "he'll drag us all down with him." I pushed back from the table, pacing the length of the conference room. "So what's your solution? Let him walk?" Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. But there's a way to make sure he falls alone." I stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black phone, setting it on the table between us. "I've already made contact with the FBI," she said. My breath caught. Sophia leaned forward, her fingers tapping lightly against the phone. "A special agent is waiting to meet you, to discuss testifying." I could only stare at her. "You set this up?" I asked. She met my gaze without blinking. I wasn't going to let you do this alone. A cold laugh escaped me. So what? This was your plan all along? Play both sides? I was covering my bases, she said simply. Unlike you, I can't afford to be reckless. I ran a hand over my face, the weight of everything crushing down on me. The moment I step into that meeting, I said slowly, there's no turning back. Sophia nodded. That's why I'm giving you a choice. She slid the black phone across the table. If you want out, she said, walk away now. No one will ever know you were involved. But if you want to finish this, meet me tomorrow at the FBI office. I picked up the phone, feeling its weight in my palm. It wasn't just a phone, it was a lifeline, or a noose. I pushed back my chair and stood, pocketing the device. Sophia didn't say another word as I walked out of her office, my mind spinning. I was about to betray my father. The question was it the right move? The sterile walls of the FBI headquarters made my skin crawl. The place smelled like coffee, paper, and quiet authority. Like decisions were made here that could ruin lives in a matter of seconds. Mine included. I pulled the door open to the conference room where Sophia was already seated at the long steel gray table. Her posture was perfect, her face a mask of controlled confidence. She barely looked up as I walked in. A man in his late 40s sat across from her, a neatly pressed suit and a badge clipped to his belt. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp eyes cataloged every move I made as I took my seat. Ethan Monroe, he said, nodding. I'm Special Agent Carter. I nodded back, though my throat was too tight to form a proper response. Agent Carter clasped his hands together and leaned forward. I appreciate you both coming in. Let's get right to it. He flipped open a thick file, scanning its contents before looking up. Your father has been under investigation for months. We've been gathering evidence, but your testimony could be the final nail in his coffin. I glanced at Sophia, who was as still as stone. She had known about this, had set this up, and hadn't told me until last night. This isn't just about stolen inheritance, is it? I asked. Agent Carter shook his head. It's about money laundering, tax fraud, and potential international crime. A weight pressed against my chest. He's connected to something bigger, Carter continued. We're talking offshore accounts, shell corporations, ties to foreign investors with less than legal business practices. We have enough to move forward, but with your cooperation, we can build a stronger case. My stomach churned. I had known my father was corrupt, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it feel real in a way I wasn't ready for. So, what exactly do you need from us? Sophia asked, her voice steady, controlled. Carter turned his attention to her. We need documents, records of internal meetings, correspondence between Richard and his business partners. Sophia nodded, unsurprised. And you, Carter said, looking at me now. We need your testimony. I clenched my fists under the table. Sophia finally looked at me. This is our chance, she said. We give them everything. In exchange, we protect ourselves and what's left of the company. I narrowed my eyes. That's what this is about for you? Preserving the Monroe name? A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, passed across her face. It's about making sure we're not collateral damage, Ethan. I exhaled slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. I had spent my entire life feeling like I didn't belong in this family. My father had stolen my future, and now I had the chance to take his away. But Sophia wasn't here for justice. She was here to protect herself. I turned back to Carter. If I do this, what happens next? We file charges, he said. There will be a trial. And if Richard Monroe is convicted, he'll be behind bars for the rest of his life. A slow, cold realization settled over me. This was real. This wasn't just exposing my father's secrets. This was putting him away for good. Carter reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward me. If you're in, sign this, he said, and we move forward. I stared at the paper. The words blurred together as my pulse pounded in my ears. I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I hovered over the line. Once I signed, there was no turning back. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The Monroe estate loomed in the distance, its grand pillars illuminated against the night sky. It looked exactly the same as it had for years. Cold, untouchable. But tonight, everything would change. Sophia had told me not to come here alone. She had practically begged me to let the FBI handle the final step, to wait for Richard to be taken in quietly, but I couldn't. I needed to see him one last time. I needed to look him in the eyes and make sure he understood that he had finally lost. As I pushed open the massive wooden doors, the familiar scent of oak and expensive whiskey filled my lungs. Every inch of this house screamed of power. His power. I found him in his study, where he always was. The fireplace crackled, casting an amber glow against the polished mahogany shelves. He sat in his leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. When he saw me, he smirked. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said, his voice casual, like we were discussing the weather. I stepped forward, pulling the signed FBI agreement from my coat pocket and slamming it onto his desk. "I testified," I said, my voice steady. "You're done." Richard glanced at the paper without picking it up. He took a slow sip of his drink and then let out a quiet chuckle. "You think you can destroy me?" His amusement was almost chilling. "You think the FBI is enough?" I felt my jaw tighten. "This isn't just about money anymore. It's about everything you've stolen from me. My future, my trust, my dignity." Richard finally set his glass down, leaning forward, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. "Tell me, Ethan, do you feel powerful now? Do you feel like you've won?" I didn't answer. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head in disappointment. "You always were the sentimental one," he mused. "And look where it got you." My stomach churned, but I didn't waver. "I know about Liam," I said. His smirk returned. "Of course you do. And I know about the offshore accounts, about the shell corporations." Richard leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "And?" "You're not going anywhere," I said. "You think you can run, but you won't get far." That made him laugh. A deep, genuine laugh, as if I had just told the most amusing joke he'd ever heard. "Oh, Ethan," he sighed, standing up slowly. "You still don't understand, do you?" He walked around the desk, stopping just inches from me. He was taller, broader, more imposing than I'd ever remember him being. "I knew," he said quietly. "I knew what you and Sophia were planning. I knew about the meeting with the FBI, about the so-called testimony you thought would seal my fate." My heart pounded. Richard smirked, lowering his voice. "You're predictable, son. And because of that, I made my own arrangements." A sinking feeling washed over me. "You think I'd sit back and let my own children betray me?" he whispered. "I've had an exit plan for years, and if you think a few signatures on a legal document will stop me, then you're a bigger fool than I thought." The air between us was thick with unspoken threats. "You want to stop me?" Richard said, his smirk never faltering. "Do it. Otherwise, step aside." I didn't move. His fingers twitched like he was ready to push past me. Then, in the distance, I heard them, the wailing of sirens. Richard froze. The color drained from his face as the sound grew louder, closer. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of his study. "You called them," he whispered, his voice no longer mocking. I met his gaze. "I told you," I said. "You're done." For the first time, Richard Monroe looked afraid. The sound of sirens shattered the stillness of the estate. Red and blue lights flashed against the massive glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the grand foyer. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, as the front doors burst open. Federal agents flooded inside, their voices sharp and commanding, FBI. Richard Monroe, step away from the desk with your hands where we can see them. Richard turned toward the entrance, his jaw clenched, his fingers twitching slightly. For a moment, it was as if he were calculating, assessing if there was still a way out. But there wasn't. The lead agent moved forward, his gun holstered, but his presence unwavering. Richard Monroe, you are under arrest for financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Richard didn't flinch. His expression was unreadable, his grip tightening around the edge of his desk. Then, from behind the agents, another figure stepped forward. Sophia. She was dressed sharply as always, her heels clicking against the marble floor, but her face was unreadable. She didn't even spare me a glance. Her gaze was locked on Richard. His mouth twitched into something that could have been a smirk if the situation weren't so dire. "So my own daughter turns on me," he murmured. Sophia didn't blink. "It's over, Dad." For the first time in my life, I saw something flicker in Richard Monroe's expression. Not anger, not arrogance, something almost hollow. But it was gone in an instant. Two agents stepped in and pulled his arms behind his back, locking the handcuffs in place. The metallic click echoed through the room. "Richard Monroe, you have the right to remain silent." As the agent recited his rights, Richard turned his eyes to me. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough!" Sophia interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Richard clenched his jaw, nostrils flaring. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. "You stole my future," I said, my voice low, steady. "And now you've lost yours." The agents pulled him toward the door. But as they reached the threshold, another figure stepped into the light. Catherine Monroe. She had been standing in the shadows, her face pale, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted between Richard, Sophia, and me, filled with something close to horror. As Richard was led past her, he didn't even glance in her direction. Her lips parted, her breath shaky. Then she turned to us. "You've destroyed this family," she whispered. Her words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "No, Mom," I said. "We saved it from him." She shook her head slowly, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Sophia exhaled sharply beside me, running a hand through her hair. "It's done," she murmured. I nodded, but a weight still pressed down on my chest. The news vans had already begun to gather outside. By morning, the world would know that Richard Monroe, one of the most powerful corporate figures in the country, had fallen. I stepped outside, the night air crisp against my skin. The reporters hadn't swarmed yet, but it was only a matter of time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. A strange chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice, low and familiar. "You think this is over, Ethan?" I stiffened. "You have no idea what's coming next." The call ended. I pulled the phone away, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen flashed with the caller ID, Liam Prescott. I clenched my jaw, staring at the name. Richard Monroe was gone. But this fight wasn't over. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the small cafe. Outside, the streets of downtown were alive with the usual mid-morning bustle, cars honking, pedestrians weaving through the sidewalks, the occasional hum of a passing train in the distance. I stepped inside, scanning the room. Liam was already there, sitting in a corner booth, one arm draped lazily over the back of his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. Of course, he was smiling. I made my way over, sliding into the seat across from him. "Well, well," he drawled, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. "Look who finally decided to face me." I ignored the smugness in his voice. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His tailored suit was perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. He looked like a man who had already won whatever game he was playing. I have to admit, he said, voice laced with amusement. I didn't think you had it in you. Taking down the old man, working with the feds. Pretty bold move. I didn't respond. Liam's smirk widened. You really did it, huh? Sent him off in handcuffs like some common criminal. Must have felt good. I exhaled slowly, refusing to let him get under my skin. You didn't drag me here just to relive the past, Liam. What do you want? He chuckled, shaking his head. Straight to the point. I respect that. He took a sip of his coffee before setting it down with a soft clink. Here's the thing, baby brother. While you were busy playing hero, I was doing my own digging. And let's just say, I found some very interesting things. I narrowed my eyes. Cut the games. Liam pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before sliding it across the table. On the screen was a folder labeled Monroe Files Classified. Inside this, Liam said, are documents that would absolutely destroy what's left of your precious family name. Deals Richard made years ago, secret transactions, evidence that even the FBI didn't get their hands on. I clenched my jaw. He leaned back, watching me carefully. You see, Ethan, I never cared about the money. I never cared about the company. What I care about is making sure everyone knows exactly who Richard Monroe was. His eyes darkened. And if that means watching everything he built burn to the ground, then so be it. I let his words hang between us, studying his expression. That's what you want? I asked. To destroy everything just because you can? Liam shrugged. Call it justice, call it revenge. Hell, call it entertainment. Doesn't matter to me. I exhaled through my nose, choosing my words carefully. You and I both know that our father is gone. This. I gestured toward the phone. This doesn't bring back what he stole from us. It doesn't change what he did. Liam tapped his fingers against the table. And yet, here you are, trying to stop me. I shook my head. I'm not stopping you. I'm giving you a choice. Liam arched an eyebrow. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. If you want to be like him, if you want to let anger and bitterness define you, then go ahead. But I'm done living in his shadow. Liam's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. I pushed back my chair and stood up. For the first time in my life, I felt light. Free. I didn't need to fight anymore. Liam watched me with an unreadable expression as I turned to leave. See you around, baby brother, he called after me. I didn't look back. The terminal was alive with the usual symphony of travel. Announcements crackled over the intercom. The rhythmic beeping of boarding passes being scanned echoed through the space, and the occasional roll of luggage wheels hummed against the polished floors. I stood near the departure gate, a one-way ticket clenched in my hand. Houston was behind me. And soon, it would stay that way. Just another chapter in a book I was finally closing. Are you sure about this? I turned to see Sophia standing there, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I am, I said simply. She let out a quiet breath and reached into her bag, pulling out a white envelope. This is for you. I frowned, hesitating before taking it. What is it? It's not much, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But it's a start. I turned the envelope over in my hands, debating whether or not to open it now. I thought you wanted to rebuild the Monroe name, I said carefully. I do. She gave a small, tired smile. But that doesn't mean you have to stay and suffer for it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Sophia had always been the one who embraced the Monroe legacy. She had fought to keep it intact, even when it threatened to swallow us whole. But now, standing here, she was finally letting me go. Thank you, I said, voice quieter than I intended. She nodded once, her gaze softening. You'll be okay, she murmured. I wasn't sure if she meant it for me or herself. A voice over the loudspeaker called for final boarding. Sophia stepped back, stuffing her hands into the pockets of her coat. Well, she said with forced lightness, I guess this is it. I nodded, gripping the envelope a little tighter, Then, for the first time in years, I pulled her into a quick embrace. She stiffened at first, caught off guard, but then her arms came around me. It was brief, awkward, but it was real. When I pulled away, I gave her one last look. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You too, little brother. With that, I turned and headed toward the gate. As I walked down the jet bridge, I finally opened the envelope. Inside, along with a check, was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was old, slightly faded. A letter. From grandfather. I unfolded it, scanning the words. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've come to a crossroads. The Monroe name is just that. A name. It holds no power over you unless you allow it to. Family is not about money. It's not about legacy. It's about the choices we make. Choose wisely and remember, you are not bound by where you came from. You are free to become whoever you wish to be. My throat tightened as I folded the letter back into the envelope. I boarded the plane, sliding into my seat. The city stretched out beneath me as the aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Skyscrapers and highways, all the places I once thought I could never leave behind, now looked so small. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from Liam. Good luck, little brother. You're gonna need it. I exhaled a small laugh, shaking my head. Then, without a second thought, I powered off my phone and slipped it into my bag. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. There comes a moment in life when you realize you are not bound by where you came from. You are not defined by your past, your family's mistakes, or the expectations placed upon you. You are free to choose, free to walk away from what no longer serves you. For me, that moment was standing at the departure gate, letting go of the weight I had carried for so long. And in that choice, I found strength. Strength to start over, to build something new, not from obligation, but from purpose. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You are not your past. You are the choices you make today. So choose yourself. Choose growth. And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt the need to break free and redefine your path, I invite you to join me. Subscribe, and let's continue this journey together.